Moscow International Airport, a veritable logistics giant and one of the most strategic air hubs in the world, was plunged into an atmosphere of palpable tension that morning. Every corner of the establishment, every street corner around the gigantic structure, seemed to quiver with the intensity of the moment. There was something unique and crucial brewing: the arrival of Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia. This wasn't just another layover or commercial flight. It was an event that required maximum security, meticulous organization, and extreme vigilance. The airport was on full alert, like a snake ready to pounce. The terminal was much more than just a place of transit that morning. It was a nerve center where every gesture, every word, every movement had capital importance. The local authorities, aware of the political weight that this welcome carried, prepared for any eventuality. Journalists and international diplomats crowded into the reserved lounges, watching the screens that followed the presidential plane, expecting any surprises or hiccups that might arise. Airport executives, although trained to handle figures of the highest stature, knew that no mistakes would be forgiven, especially with someone like Putin. What was happening behind the scenes, however, was much more subtle. The pressure on security employees was immense. The airport was used to welcoming dignitaries, but preparation for the arrival of a world leader like Putin went far beyond routine. Security personnel were under the control of a command center where information about the route of Putin's flight was constantly updated. Every movement, every arrival was scrutinized and validated in real time. But in this whirlwind of information and verification, one element would be overlooked: an insignificant but fatal error. When Putin's plane finally landed, the scene unfolded almost like a ritual, a crossroads of important figures and scrupulously calculated gestures. Accompanied by his bodyguards and senior officials, Putin stepped off the jet, surrounded by an aura of power. However, due to the exceptional conditions of this secret mission, the Russian president chose to travel under discreet cover. He was in a more secluded section of the airport, out of sight, away from cameras and crowds. This allowed him to move more freely and avoid excessive attention, a move which, for him, was part of the political game. But one mistake, no matter how small, would change everything. A civil servant, a seemingly ordinary security guard, makes an error in judgment. In good faith, he passed the president through the security gates like any other traveler. The system, which usually works without a hitch, reported a minor problem. An insignificant detail in the safety documentation, an incorrect code or a poorly updated reference, derailed the procedure. Under the pressure of constant surveillance and rigid protocols, the security guard, overwhelmed by the situation, decided to carry out an additional check. "A routine check," he murmured, as if to justify himself to the higher authority observing him. But no one knew that this incident would ignite the world diplomatic scene. From there, the situation unfolded quickly, almost mechanically, like a chain reaction triggered by an administrative error. Uniformed police officers surrounded Putin without question, as if the man they were escorting was just a private citizen undergoing a security check. They paid no particular attention to his appearance or behavior, not realizing that the individual they were displacing was the most powerful man in the country. Putin, although remaining calm on the outside, felt the heat of the situation growing. The murmurs of agitation became more present around him. He knew instantly that something was wrong. This was not just a routine check. He was in an isolation corridor, accompanied by a group of police officers who, inexplicably, did not seem to recognize the president of Russia. Humiliation and frustration took hold of him, but he knew better than anyone that the moment he was experiencing could become a major diplomatic crisis. He decided not to react immediately, not to give in to the temptation to show public anger. But at the same time, he knew that this kind of misunderstanding was unacceptable. The furious look he gave the police officers around him left no room for ambiguity. He was not just an ordinary man, but the president of a great nation. He took out his phone, without haste, and sent a direct message to his foreign minister. This message, although calmly written, would send shockwaves through the Russian government. The message arrived at its destination within seconds. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, aware of the situation through a secure connection, immediately took the necessary measures. Suddenly, the incident, although banal at first, took a completely different turn. Putin, true to his strategic character, chose not to escalate the situation publicly right away. He knew that this administrative error had much greater implications. When the incident reached the ears of Russian authorities, the initial reaction was frosty, marked by deafening silence. Astonishment set in the Kremlin like a crashing wave, and as the first information trickled in through dispatches, anger rose slowly but irresistibly. The first rumors spread on social networks, sparking a wave of indignation. Then came the official reports and confirmation of the worst. Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, had been treated like an ordinary citizen, subjected to an erroneous security check, and escorted out of the airport without any recognition of his status. The humiliation was profound, and it was not limited simply to the attack on the dignity of the president, but also on Russia's image on the international stage. The Kremlin felt on high alert, aware of the diplomatic ramifications that this incident would cause. The Russian press, traditionally loyal but always ready to denounce a perceived weakness, seized the affair with unprecedented virulence. National and international news channels went into overdrive. The titles followed one another at a frantic pace. Putin treated like a criminal upon arrival at the airport. The humiliation of Russia on its own soil. And unprecedented diplomatic incident, Moscow airport at fault. The Kremlin, eager to restore national honor, demanded immediate answers. Internal discussions intensified in the corridors of power. The Russian foreign minister, who was already in a meeting with local authorities, prepared for emergency intervention. While Russian diplomats consulted, only one question remained unanswered: how to minimize the damage from this monumental blunder. President Putin, known for his ability to manipulate international affairs with glacial finesse, knew that this incident had to be handled with diplomacy worthy of the affront. But Kremlin advisors and spokespeople had another pressure: to restore Russia's image internationally while avoiding unnecessary escalation. Meanwhile, Moscow airport found itself in a much worse situation than he ever imagined. At first, officials thought the incident was minor, an administrative error that could be quickly corrected. However, awareness of the extent of the error came slowly, in a succession of alarming discoveries. Emergency meetings took place in the airport offices, and officials, initially shocked, quickly saw the extent of the repercussions. The incident was no longer a simple security blunder. It was a public humiliation of a head of state and, therefore, of Russia itself. Airport authorities, nervous and panicked, rushed to hold a series of press conferences, calling for an immediate public apology. But the words of contrition seemed both insufficient and late given the magnitude of the situation. A climate of panic set in among the airport staff. Many of them, trapped in security procedures and in the excitement of events, could not imagine that their clumsiness would lead to such a diplomatic explosion. These employees, who were originally well-intentioned in their security checks, now found themselves at the center of a media storm, under pressure from a government machine that demanded an immediate and exemplary response. Press conferences followed one after another, where the spokespersons tried to justify the actions of the airport, but the official apologies seemed more and more futile in the face of the international revolt that was looming. "The error is regrettable," declared an airport official. "We sincerely apologize for the incident and are doing everything we can to clarify the situation." But these words seemed hollow, drowned under the weight of the anger that was rising in Russia and beyond its borders. It was then that foreign diplomats, who had watched the events unfold from a certain distance, began to express their discontent. The European press launched into harsh criticism of Russian officials, while Western governments called for a quick resolution to the incident. "This affront to Russia must be corrected immediately," said a European representative, his voice serious. "An incident of this nature cannot go unanswered." While the Moscow airport was in the midst of a crisis, seeking to repair the unthinkable mistake it had just made, an unexpected figure appeared. The Russian Interior Minister, a man of imposing charisma and a reputation for toughness, entered the emergency hall accompanied by a small group of advisors. His presence, imposing and full of gravity, immediately silenced the frenzy that reigned in the offices and corridors of the airport. His face, usually impassive, bore the imprint of cold anger, barely concealed under a mask of professionalism. With a determined step, he headed towards the airport officials, who were standing together, visibly nervous and overwhelmed by the scale of the incident. The minister stared at them for a moment in silence, assessing the extent of the disaster. Then, breaking the heavy silence that reigned in the room, he spoke in a dry, icy tone. "I advise you to prepare yourself for an immediate public response, otherwise this will become a much more serious issue than you can imagine." His words were incisive, weighing heavily on the shoulders of those responsible, who knew very well that the situation was spiraling out of control. Without waiting for a response, the minister took out his cell phone with almost mechanical precision, and with one fluid gesture he entered into direct communication with the highest officials in the Kremlin. He only needed a few minutes to establish contact with influential political figures. His telephone exchanges, although private, were charged with a palpable urgency. The atmosphere in the room became even heavier. At that moment, all eyes were on the airport, and every move by the Russian authorities would be scrutinized. A feeling of worry intensified. Airport officials, cornered, understood that this era could not be satisfied with internal excuses. The minister, with icy calm, told them that the incident would quickly take a much more serious diplomatic turn. "This is no longer a simple administrative error," he added. "We are talking about an international provocation and humiliation." Diplomatic relations with the host country were now at stake, and the question was no longer just how to right the wrong, but how to limit the global repercussions. At that precise moment, a new wave of chaos descended on the airport. An amateur video, filmed by a witness to the incident, was broadcast live on social networks. The images, although blurry and poorly framed, were sufficiently evocative to fuel the perception of a gross and humiliating error. The scene of Putin's expulsion, seen from this amateurish perspective, seemed even more damning.
The video spread at dizzying speed, resounding around the world like a media bomb.
Comments multiplied online. A president treated like a criminal, a live humiliation of the Russian state, a mistake that will be costly. Global reactions were not long in coming. The incident became a hot topic on all news channels. International channels continued to report back and forth, with political analysts coming one after the other to speculate on the ramifications of this administrative failure. The error of a simple official at the airport became an epicenter of diplomatic tensions, highlighting the fragilities of international relations. The word crisis was now on everyone's lips. The question tormenting analysts was simple. Would this incident trigger a breakdown in relations between Russia and the host country, or would it simply be a fleeting media storm? In the Kremlin, discussions were intense. Senior officials met in a secure room, determined to prepare a strong and rapid response. The extent of the humiliation felt by President Putin and the Russian government was palpable. However, the objective was clear: to prevent the affair from turning into an international diplomatic crisis. A carefully worded and balanced official statement from the Kremlin was quickly sent to the media. The Russian foreign minister, in charge of handling the situation diplomatically, spoke at a televised press conference, calling the incident an unacceptable mistake. He demanded an investigation and a detailed explanation into the causes of the airport error. However, despite the Kremlin's efforts to minimize the damage was done. The incident continued to make headlines, and Russia's image, already fragile on the international scene, suffered. The airport officials realized the extent of the error they had just made. Putin's public humiliation could not be erased with the stroke of a pen. While the airport and the Kremlin worked to patch things up, Moscow Airport announced, in an official statement, a series of formal apologies addressed not only to Putin, but also to the Russian nation. Staff involved in the incident were immediately reassigned to other administrative duties. However, despite attempts to restore order, the atmosphere at the airport would never be the same again. Airport officials realized, too late, that even a small error, a simple administrative confusion, could turn into a global crisis. They had underestimated the fragility of the situation and the impact that an event that initially seemed insignificant could have. That day, Moscow's airport and the Kremlin learned a brutal lesson. Even the smallest flaws in administrative machinery could lead to devastating consequences on the world stage. The incident, although officially resolved, left deep diplomatic scars that would mark international relations for a long time.